All right. So, continuation from last week. And last week I was paying more attention about the war between the Persians and the Greeks and, story of Alexander's and so forth. So, today I'm going to really talk about some of the stories of chapter 11. Going back, and I've been actually covering about chapter 11, verse 1 through 5, probably the week before last week, and this week again, because there's just so many things in between that. After verse 3, the verse 4 says, and as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his prosperity, nor according to the authority with which he rules, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So, I need to just to talk about the successor of Alexander. After death of Alexander, what happens, and how the story changed after the death of Alexander. I don't know if you ever heard of the term the War of Daidachi. Daidachi is the literally successor of the Alexander. This is the war between the generals of the Alexander, and after his death, Alexander did not leave his son, because when he died, he did not have a son at the time. Even though Roxanne was pregnant, he did not have a son. So he did not leave any of his power, or he did not appointed any successor who should be ruling after Alexander, and he died. So since everything was left open, many of the general had their own idea how they want to lead the humongous of the land that Alexander had left. So the generals under Alexander started to fight each other to really take the ownership, or take the land, or the split of those territories for their own sake. So that war is called the War of Daidachi. Excuse me. I'll be the coughing here or there, so just excuse me as I just do coughing. Unfortunately, I have some the coughing here. So today I'm going to talk about the War of Daidachi in order for us to get to the story of verse 5. So, as I mentioned, Daidachi means the successor. That's what it really means. After the death of Alexander, literally, one of the general named Perdiccas, he was actually appointed as the regent. So what they did was, since there was no king, they actually had appointed step-brother of Alexander. His name is Aridaeus. Aridaeus is actually later became the Philip III. Unfortunately, the Philip III was not in a really just he was not like Alexander at all. He was just there are many historical facts that he shows that he has some issues, and he had a little bit of lack of intelligence. But since there was a nobody actually just appointed as a king, Philip III became a king. So the the generals actually discussed among themselves and who should be the king of this. So what they did was, okay, why don't we just pick the Philip III as the king, and later on, if Roxanne, have the baby boy, then we're going to appoint them as the king, as the really successor of Alexander, until we know for sure that he will become a king. Then we will going to be regions to really just to help them to govern and manage the land that Alexander had left to us. So later on, Roxanne delivers the baby boy. He is the Alexander the Fourth. So literally, two king became a king. One is the Philip the Third, and Alexander the Fourth. It became a king, but Alexander Fourth is just a baby, so they cannot act as a king. And Philip the Third was literally just a king, but he was not really just. He was just the. He just named the king, but he wasn't really doing anything. But all the generals of the Alexander was literally just ruling everything. So Perdiccas was the one who actually initially, had the most power, and he was the one, the leading the rest of the generals. But obviously, not every generals align with the Perdiccas. The Perdiccas, he was the, apparently he was the most powerful, and he was the one who actually governed everything. Some of the generals feared him, and some of the people weren't too happy because they did not like the fact that he was trying to just like control everything, right? So there was sort of like trying to just defend each other, and some of the issue between Perdiccas and the rest of the generals started to kind of erupt. But the real important part that actually occurred between the Perdiccas versus the rest of all the generals, or because of the Alexander the Great's the dead bodies. While Perdiccas was trying to just send the Alexander's dead body over to Macedonia, while he was actually carrying the Alexander dead body, later on, Ptolemy from Egypt intercept the dead bodies, and then he actually just brought that Alexander's dead body over to Memphis. Later on, that he actually moved over to Alexandria, but because of that, the eruptions between the Perdiccas and the rest of the generals started to just like getting really intensified. So out of the anti-Perdiccas, the group was literally just the four people. One was the Antipater and Craterus and Antigonus and also Ptolemy. Those are the four generals who had the most power besides the Perdiccas. Obviously, Antipater was one of the generals of Alexander's father, which is the Philip II. He was the generals of his father's, Alexander's father's general, but he continued to support Alexander. But Antipater was literally just to kind of like bring all these people together, the Craterus and Antigonus and Ptolemy, because everybody had a little bit of a issue with the Perdiccas, so he was able to bring everyone together to fight against the Perdiccas. So, since Perdiccas actually saw that the Ptolemy took the Alexander's dead bodies, and he was going against against his order, he just saw it as just rebellion. So what happened is he was actually trying to fight against Ptolemy, but he did not know that Antipater was actually just having this, alliance between the Craterus and Antigonus and Ptolemy together and fight against the Perdiccas. But from the Antipaters, there was a reason why he got so upset with the Perdiccas, because there was what the reason was. What happened was Antipater wanted to actually have a little bit of a good relationship with the Perdiccas. So what he did was Antipater actually gave his daughter to Perdiccas to marry. So that way, just like anything else in an ancient day, when you actually give your daughters to marry to another man, that means, we're going to really have a good relationship, and we're going to really just to have alliances and so forth. So Antipater gave his daughter Nicaea. So Nicaea was actually coming from Macedonia all the way over to Babylon. While she was coming to Perdiccas received the letter from Alexander's sister, Cleopatra. Cleopatra sent a letter to Perdiccas saying, "Why don't you marry me?" But Perdiccas already committed that he's going to marry to Nicaea, which is the daughters of Antipater. But from Perdiccas' perspective, if he married to Alexander's the sisters, it opens the new door for him that he will become, the king, because now he's marrying to Alexander's siblings. So he could not really refuse. But he could not just say, well, I'm not marrying to Nicaea, because now he was afraid of Antipater. So he wrote the letter back to Cleopatra and say, "I will marry you. Later on, I will marry to Nicaea for now, but I'm going to just divorce with her, and I'm going to marry you." So he wrote the letter over to Cleopatra. While he was sending the message out to Cleopatra, Antigonus intercepted that letter. And then he found out that Perdiccas was trying to just divorce with the Nicaea, which he hasn't even married yet. And then since Antigonus was not having a good, relationship with Perdiccas, what he did was he actually took that letter and he went to Antipater and then told Antipater what Perdiccas was doing. Of course, Antipater was like furious. He was just really upset. But what? I just sent my daughter to you, and then you're going to divorce my daughter, and you're going to marry to, Cleopatra, which is the Alexander's sisters? No way. And then that's when Antipater started to just gather. He sent the letter over to Ptolemy, and he was making alliance with Craterus. Craterus was one of the personal secretary of Alexander. So then they just made an alliance together to remove the Perdiccas. That's the very first the war of the first war of the Daidachi started because of that incident. So when the Perdiccas was literally having, officially he was the regent, he had the most power, and he was literally staying in the Babylon area, and Antipater was kind of like brought his the soldiers and infantry and then try to attack the Perdiccas while he was traveling from the Macedonia over to Asia Minor. Asia Minor is where the Turkey is. While he was traveling there, that's where another general called Eumenes. Eumenes was under. Eumenes was. No, hang on one second. Eumenes was actually Alexander's the personal secretary. I'm sorry. The Craterus was another Macedonian general. Sorry. So Eumenes was under Perdiccas, but since he was the one who was governing the Asia Minor area, while he was traveling, Antipater had to deal with the Craterus. So what happened was he actually left the Craterus to deal with the Eumenes. But at the time, Craterus was one of the most famous Macedonian general at that time. And many of the Macedonians respected the Craterus because he was one of the bravest and the warrior of the Macedonians. While he left the Craterus to deal with the Eumenes, and then he just left them. They split the infantry, and then Antipater was just moving down to meet with the Perdiccas, while he was actually just leaving the Craterus to fight against the Eumenes. After Antipater left, Eumenes had a fight with the Craterus, but because of many of the soldiers under Eumenes also Macedonians, and none of the Macedonian wanted to fight against Craterus because Craterus was one of the respected warrior of the Macedonia. So Eumenes told him he's not fighting against the Craterus, but he told someone else that was leading it. And then because he was not telling the Macedonian warrior, he's not fighting against the Craterus, and then later on the Eumenes actually just to fight against the Craterus, and he actually killed the Craterus who left there. While he was actually just on the way, what happened was, remember I mentioned that Ptolemy took the Alexander's dead body and intercepted and brought the Alexander's dead body to Memphis. So what happened was, Perdiccas was so mad that he did that. So he was traveling to Egypt to fight against the Ptolemy. So he brought all his the soldiers over to Egypt. But when you go to Egypt, let me see if I can actually just find the map. Let me see if I can. Remember last week or even before last week, I mentioned that there's the the map of Egypt, what it looks like. Let me see if I can actually find that. Hang on one second. Where's the map? Well, I don't have the good map, but let's use this one. So you see the map here?
Yes.
Yeah. So in order for anyone to come to Egypt, right? This is where the Memphis is. When he was traveling all the way down here, well, this is not the map of that battle, but when they were coming down this, through this Jerusalem, Gaza, and the plain of Sinai, and then when you come to this area, what you really face is the Nile River. Nile River is something where you need to cross to get to Memphis here. So the dilemma that he has was Ptolemy's soldiers on this side, which is the west side of the Nile, whereas Perdiccas on the right side, which is the east side of the Nile. So in order for the Perdiccas to really attack the Ptolemy, he has to go across the Nile River. But Nile River could be one of the dangerous places you can go across, because imagine they fight against any other enemies on the land with the horses and the also with the elephants and stuff like that. But he need to get his soldiers across the Nile. But the problem is, when the water is very high, it's very difficult to go across. And when you go across, you cannot go across with the large infantry. So your way to go across the Nile River has to be narrowed down. So what happened was they actually put the elephants on the one side of the Nile River and then have the other soldiers to go across the Nile. While he was actually trying to go across the Nile River, of course, the Ptolemy would not just let them just to go across the Nile. So they would try to attack the Perdiccas, the infantry, at the place of the middle of a Nile. So there was a fighting. So what happened was the Perdiccas lost all his soldiers going across the river. They're either completely destroyed, or some of them survived, but some people either eaten up by the crocodiles, and some was destroyed by the attack from the Ptolemy. So Perdiccas, the infantry, could not go across. So one day he actually sent about the small groups of infantry over the across the Nile, and then second attack, and he lost all his soldiers again. And then he retreated. The Perdiccas retreated, and it said, we have to plan something to really just attack the Ptolemy. So what he did was, he was regrouping with all his generals, and say, hey, we're going to have to go across one way or another. Even though we're going to have lots of losses, we're going to have to just go across and then just to have to fight with the Ptolemy. While he was actually planning to do so, people weren't too happy, because many of the people died at the Nile River. And what happened was that some of the generals of Perdiccas rebelled against the Perdiccas and assassinated the Perdiccas. So Perdiccas was actually led his infantry to fight against the Ptolemy, but because of the rebellion that occurred from the generals of the Perdiccas, he was assassinated before he had a real fight with the Ptolemy. And literally, that's when the Perdiccas died. So, the generals who killed the Perdiccas actually went back to anti-Perdiccas, which is Antipater, Craterus, Antigonus, and Ptolemy, and they said, hey, let's just make a treaty here. So they made the treaty with all the anti-Perdiccas groups, and they say, hey, we don't want to fight with you. There's no reason for us to fight, because Perdiccas dead, all right? So let's just have a peace. And that's how the war of the Daidachi ended. So the region Perdiccas was removed from the all the generals who was fighting against it. So once again, who was the king? Philip III. Alexander IV was the king, and the region was the Perdiccas, and the people who were against the Perdiccas was Antipater, Craterus, Antigonus, and Ptolemy. But Craterus died at the battlefield and fighting against with the Eumenes, right? And then Perdiccas dead because of the rebellion that occurred from some of the generals under the Perdiccas, and they assassinated the Perdiccas because they were upset. So at that time, Antipater started to ruling Macedonia area. Antigonus took the Syria, which is the big portions of the Babylons and the all the Persians was ruling, and Ptolemy took the Egypt regions. So that's why how they actually just kind of like splitted the land and then started to ruling the areas. And then about the war ended, the very first war of Daidachi, Antipater was very old because, as I mentioned, Antipater was the generals of the Philip II, which is Alexander's father's general. So you could imagine how old he was. And Antipater was very old, and he died at age of 80. That was a year after the first war of Daidachi ended. And Antipater, as he died, he did not give his power to his son. He has a son called Cassander. Cassander was a son of Antipater, but instead of giving the power to his son Cassander, he actually gave his power to one of his general. His name was Polyperchon. Polyperchon was the generals of Antipater, and he took the powers from Antipater. And obviously Cassander was upset because he's supposed to be the successor of his father. Then he's supposed to really take over the control of all this Macedonian or the Greek the regions, but he was not. So what he did was, you know what? I don't like this idea, so I'm just gonna send a letter over to Ptolemy and Antigonus, and then I know you guys also want to just control your region, so why don't we just gang up together and let's fight against the Polyperchon. So this is how the second war of Daidachi started. So if the first war of Daidachi was the war between the Perdiccas and the four other generals against the Perdiccas, the second war of Daidachi was a little bit different than the first one. So now this time, since the Antipater is dead, now Polyperchon and Cassander, Antigonus, and Ptolemy, and Lysimachus. Those are the four generals to gang up together and fight against the Polyperchon. So now the second war was actually started. So let's just talk about the first 2 years of a war between the Polyperchon and the anti-Polyperchon, which is the alliance that Cassander and Antigonus and Ptolemy and Lysimachus was, fighting. Cassander took the lead on it. So Cassander kind of pushed the Polyperchon, and he went to Macedonia. And what he did was he went to Philip III, and he asked Philip III, because he was the king, right? He was the two kings. Philip III and Alexander IV was the king. So he went to the Philip III and say, hey, make me a region. And then, obviously, Philip III really does not have much of a power, right? So the Cassander, who brought all his soldiers with him, infantry with him, and they say, give me the power. What is the Philip III is going to do? Okay, You got it. So Philip III gave the power to the Cassander, and Cassander said, "Well, I received the power from Philip III. The king gave me the authority to do so." And Polyperchon, on the other hand, he went to the Olympias. Olympias is Alexander's mother. So remember, at the time, the king is Philip III and Alexander IV. And still, Olympias, the Alexander's mother, was actually just wanted to really protect his son, sons, his son's sons, which is Alexander IV. So Olympias and Roxanne and Alexander IV was the group together as one group, and Philip III was another group. So Polyperchon, he went to Olympias and asking for the support and protection. So Olympias has said, "Well, I'm going to give you the authority." So now the group has split it because Philip III was anointed Cassander as the regent, whereas Olympias and the Roxannes and Alexander IV gave the authority to Polyperchon and said, "You're the regent." So now there's two different groups of kings are giving two different authority. One over to Cassander, the other one is over to Polyperchon. So now they're fighting each other, and now, of course, this is a chaos because remember, there's nothing is really stable in this, at this time. So Polyperchon says Philip III does not have the really rights to become a king, because first of all, the Philip III is not the real brothers of Alexander, because Philip III was the stepbrother of Alexander, which is Philip III is not the son of Olympias. So Polyperchon said, "You don't have a right to become a king, to take over Alexander's, the land he have let." So he did not just acknowledge it. He said, "We're going to have to bring him down as the king." So Polyperchon was actually attacked in Macedonia again. And at the time, when he just attacked Macedonia, he actually just made an alliance with Eumenes. While Polyperchon attacked Macedonia, at that time, Cassander had left that cities to really, having another war. Since the Cassanders and his infantry was not in the city to fight against the Polyperchon, Polyperchon was able to really just capture that city very easily. So when Polyperchon invaded into Macedonia, Polyperchon killed Philip III and his wife and his son, removed him completely and killed him and all his families. So therefore, Philip III and his entire family was destroyed by the Polyperchon. So there was two kings at that time, as I mentioned, Philip III and Alexander IV. But now Philip III was executed by the Polyperchon. But who's left? Alexander IV. Because remember, who made Polyperchon the regent? Olympias, Roxanne, Alexander IV. So now he had the right reason to become a regent because he removed the Philip III. So of course, now Cassander was upset. So what happened was he actually, while Polyperchon was taking over, Excuse me. While Polyperchon was invading into Macedonia and took over the city, Cassander, since he heard the news that Polyperchon removed the Philip III, Cassander, on the other hand, he actually attacked Olympias. He actually captured the other cities. So while he was actually just captured the city where Olympias, Roxanne, and Alexander IV, and then captured them as the hostage and threatened the Polyperchon, if you don't give me the city again, I'm gonna kill them. Well, then Polyperchon will not have any rights. So, unfortunately, he had to actually just negotiate with the Cassander, because they actually, used Olympias and Roxanne and Alexander IV as a hostage. So Polyperchon had no choice to really negotiate, and what happened was, they made the agreement. Cassander will not kill Olympias, Roxanne, and Alexander IV, and instead Polyperchon gave up. So he was put into prison. He just surrendered because of the situations. So Polyperchon was actually put into prison, and Cassander took the city back. When Eumenes obviously was still fighting against the rest of the alliances, Eumenes was moving over to the Babylon area, and he was actually making a good progress to fighting against the Antigonus. So literally, Antigonus almost lost the battle with all his generals that he was working with. And when Antigonus was working with other generals, what he did was Antigonus left Seleucus. Seleucus was one of the a general of Alexander as well. He left Seleucus in the Babylon area, and he was fighting against Eumenes, and Eumenes was taking the lead and making a good progress to destroying the Antigonus. But unfortunately, what happened was, almost the last battles of Antigonus and Eumenes, if there's one more battle, he was going to destroy Antigonus. But just like what happened with the Perdiccas, two of the generals under Eumenes rebel against Eumenes, and two generals captured Eumenes and handed over to Antigonus. The Eumenes almost won the battle. He was like, one more attack, he would have destroyed Antigonus. But the stupid two generals, rebel against the Eumenes, and they handed the Eumenes over to Antigonus. Of course, Antigonus was happy because he was almost lost the battle. He would get killed one more battle. But now, since two generals under Eumenes brought the Eumenes back under him, Eumenes was killed. And then, now he turned the things around. And later on, Antigonus killed those two generals who brought those Eumenes as well. Because what happened was, those two generals who brought the Eumenes, they're the one, it's called a silver shield. So what the silver shield is, one of the best Alexander's the soldiers who protected all the treasures of the kingdom. And Eumenes actually took that and brought him under him, even though they were the strongest fighters and the best fighter of all the team. But because of that, generals who was leading the silver shield and handed Eumenes over to Antigonus. Even though Antigonus really knew the silver shield was the best soldiers and warriors of that time, because what he has seen that he handed his boss over to the enemy, they could do the same thing to Antigonus. So, although he was happy that actually they brought the Eumenes and executed the Eumenes, he did not trust the silver shield. So later on, he killed both of the generals who handed the Eumenes over to Antigonus, and then all his silver shield over to the east battlefield and let them die at the battlefield because he did not trust it. So therefore, because of the second Daidachi war, what happened? Now, who died? Philip III died because of Polyperchon. And then Polyperchon was put into to jail, the prison. Eumenes died because of his rebellious generals under him, and Antigonus removed him. So now the second war of Daidachi is ended that way. So therefore, who really got the benefit out of this? The Cassander took the control over the Greece and area, whereas Antigonus, on the other hand, really got the real power. They both got the benefit of it because Antigonus literally took over the entire east regions where the Persian was ruling, because Cassander was literally taking over the Greece area, right, and Macedonia. Lysimachus was just took over the upper part of the regions, which was a smaller part. So let me see if I can actually show you what that region looks like. Well, I don't have the really good map, but I'm going to use this anyway. Let me know if you see this map. Okay, so when you look at this one, you can see the Cassander right here, which is he's the one who's taking over all this Macedonia and the Greece. So you can see the Sparta, Athens, right? This is the Greece and the Macedonian area, the regions. He took over this area. Lysimachus was just the upper part of the land right here. This is where he actually took the control of. Antigonus, on the other hand, was actually just taking it. You'll see this Seleucus here, but at this time the Seleucus was not in the power. So Antigonus literally took over an entire area of this land, which is the biggest land of all. Ptolemy, on the other hand, as you can see here, he was taking over the Egypt area. What you see down here? So Antigonus literally took over an entire land of, from here, Asia Minor, all the way over to the India area. This is what the Antigonus literally took over. So, as you can see, Antigonus was actually utilized the opportunity to make an alliance with the Cassander to take over this entire land. while the Cassander took the control of this Macedonia and Greece area, because that's what he wanted. Because Antipater, his father, if he actually gave the power over the Cassander, they would not have the war of the second Daidachi. But because he actually gave the power to Polyperchon, this is why Cassander wanted to just have a war. And because of that, Philip III was removed from this war, and this is how the war of Daidachi really just that happened. So that was between the second war of Daidachi happened between the BC 319 through BC 316. So it's only lasted for like 3 years. So after the second war of the Daidachi was a little bit of the peace, but 1 year later there was a third war of Daidachi started. If the second war of the Daidachi started because of the Cassander, he wanted to take control of his father's land. And as I mentioned, Antigonus was the one who actually just took the advantage of it. But because of the second war of Daidachi, Antigonus took the biggest land of all, right? So people weren't too happy. And Antigonus, because he took the biggest land of all, he wanted to just literally, take over the rest of the land to unite the entire land where Alexander was ruling. So he was trying to just gaining more power and then literally taking over the rest of the land under him. So he wanted to just make sure he wanted to just take the full control. And remember, when Antigonus was fighting with the Eumenes, he left the Seleucus at the Babylon. Remember, while he was fighting with the Eumenes. So at that time, Seleucus was working as the governor of the Babylon, because at that time, remember, Babylon has always been a key part of the East, because think about it, from the time when Babylon existed, Babylon always been the center of all the Mesopotamian, the culture. So the fortress of the Babylon was always is the number one area that you need to take control of. And Antigonus left the Seleucus left there as a governing. He wanted to take that control back because he needs to have that control back from Seleucus. So while Antigonus and the Seleucus was working together during the second war of Daidachi, now Antigonus wanted to take the control back. So Antigonus just invaded into Babylon, and then Seleucus could not fight against Antigonus because Antigonus was too powerful, and he's got so much power, and there's no way that Seleucus be able to fight against this Antigonus. So he literally left everything behind. He left with one of his horse. He left all his soldiers and he left everything else behind, and he just literally left himself from the Babylon, because he didn't want to just sacrifice his warriors or his soldiers. So he literally only the one who left the city. Of course, one day, all of a sudden, he lost all his power from Babylon, which is the most important and critical city of the East. So what happened was Seleucus now have lost all his power, so he needed to find a way to settle in somewhere. So where he did go was literally he went to Ptolemy. Remember, I don't know if I mentioned last week, Ptolemy was one of the, very, very close friend of Alexander. Ptolemy was a grown up with Alexander, and they were really, really good friends. Of course, there are many other friends, but Ptolemy was very close. So, for those of you who watched the movie Alexander, if you actually pay attention, the whole story of the Alexander movie is start off as if Ptolemy is giving the story of the Alexander. So that's why the Ptolemy was actually he was actually telling a story, and the writer is recording it. That was a Ptolemy from Egypt, because the Ptolemy was very close to Alexander. And I'm going to tell you later on, when you actually go to the Egypt, there is the city called Alexandria. Do you know Alexandria? You probably heard of this, Alexandria. Alexandria was one of the city that Ptolemy built and gave the name Alexandria, named after his friend Alexander. That's how the city name became Alexandria. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the Ptolemy a little more later on. But let's come back to the story. So, what happened? Seleucus left the Babylon by himself, right? And he went to Ptolemy, because Ptolemy at the time was the most bravest generals of all time. And he believed that Ptolemy would be able to actually help him. And remember, Seleucus was one of the greatest general under Alexander as well. And when he went to Ptolemy, Ptolemy accepted Seleucus, and then, I'll take you. You're one of the best of the Alexander's the general. Why don't we just work together to fight against Antigonus? Because Antigonus is trying to just expand his territory, and eventually, one way or another, he's going to try to attack us. So why don't we just make an alliance together? So why don't you come under me? So Seleucus became a general of Ptolemy. So, now, this is how the third war of Daidachi started. This time, who is Antigonus versus Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus. So now you can see there's always the one against another alliance. Right? It's just keep fighting against the same. It's just different generals. So now, who's the king? Alexander the Fourth is the king. He's the only one who's left, because the Philip the Third was killed by the Polyperchon, right? So Antigonus was literally just asking to just obedience to him, because he wanted to just have ambitions that he wants to take over the rest of the regions that Alexander had left. So Antigonus literally just took over the Babylon areas and entire the Mesopotamian area where the Persian used to really rule. So now the third war of Daidachi started. So the first thing that he did was he tried to just attack the Cassander, which is Greece. While he had the most power at that time, but while he was invaded into Cassander, which is the Greece, remember, his base is where the Babylon is, right? So all his soldiers and infantry was, was with the Antigonus while he was actually attacking Greece. What happened at the Babylon? Is empty, right? So he did not leave the many soldiers behind the Babylon because he was focusing on the war between Cassander to take over the Greece. At that time, Ptolemy, working with the Ptolemy, they were coming from the Egypt all the way up to Gaza and the Israel, also what's the name of the city? But he was just coming up there. So what happened was Antigonus, his son Demetrius, was fighting against Ptolemy. Since he was fighting against the Cassander, he left his son Demetrius fighting against the Ptolemy and the Seleucus, and obviously Demetrius was not able to fight against the Ptolemy and the Seleucus together because they were the most bravest generals and they had experience. So Demetrius was completely just lost all his battle, and he was just pushing up. So while the Ptolemy was pushing Demetrius up in that region, what happened was Seleucus said, "You know what, Ptolemy, let me go and attack the center of the Babylon." And Ptolemy said, "Why don't you do so? We should take control of the Babylon again because you are the governor of that area. So why don't you just go and attack that area?" While Antigonus is fighting against the Cassander. So what happened was Ptolemy sent Seleucus take over the Babylon. So they split. So Seleucus went over to Babylon, and Ptolemy was still fighting against Demetrius. Antigonus fighting with the Cassander, and now their fighting is happening in all different areas. So literally, Seleucus was easily take over the Babylon because what was left in the Babylon was not the really core infantry of the Antigonus. So literally, he was just lost as Babylon, and Seleucus literally just tried to take control over all those regions. Remember the map that I showed you before? Now you saw that Seleucus was the big portions on the left side on the Mesopotamia. I can't even pronounce it anymore. Mesopotamian areas, he literally took over that regions. So Antigonus lost a big portion of those areas. So now his land became smaller. Now Antigonus was literally just governing the Asia Minors and a little bit of the west up to that area, but the land was divided into one, towards the Seleucus as well as Antigonus. And let me just actually show you that map again. It's easier. Let's just take a look at the map again. Here we go. So now, Cassander here, Lysimachus was here, Ptolemy was here, Antigonus was here, and Seleucus here. So now you can see Antigonus used to really rule the entire land of this one, but because Seleucus took over the Babylon here, right? This, and then he literally just take over the rest of the east regions entirely here. So Antigonus, all of a sudden, while he was fighting against the Cassander, he was trying to just take the Greece. He lost all this east. What do you think? Cassander was really, really upset. Really, really upset. Remember, Why does it happen? A couple of reasons. Number one, for them, for the Macedonians, right? Taking over the Europe, which is the Greece and the Macedonia, was their root, right? Because that's where they started, right? For them, taking over the Greece and the Macedonia was the big part of them. So they need to take ownership of that area. That's why Antigonus wanted to just take over that entire region. But because he actually had ambitions to take over the Greece and the Macedonia, while he was actually just fighting against the Cassander, he lost all his east land. So obviously, now he got sandwiched because now he's fighting against Ptolemy on the Egypt area, and he's taking over the Syria area, and the Cassander is from the fighting back from Europe, and Lysimachus was there. So literally, he was cornered because every corner all their alliance was fighting against him. So what happened was, while Antigonus taking over, or not so much of a taking over, the fighting against the Cassander, he let the Polyperchans freed from the prison, and it made an alliance with the Polyperchon. Remember, Polyperchon was put into prison by the Cassander. So imagine how much Polyperchon was just, literally just wanted to kill Cassander, right? So Antigonus made alliance with the Polyperchon, while the rest of the guys were just fighting against, the Antigonus. So, since the war was just intensified, Antigonus realized that he cannot just sustain like this anymore. So what happened was, let's just make the peace treaty here. So what happened was, they made a treaty, the peace treaty, and Antigonus said, let's make an agreement here. We only have one king here. Alexander IV is the king. So we shouldn't be really fighting against each other because we're not the king. So since the Alexander IV is still young, until he grown up as the adults and be able to become a true king to rule the entire regions, let's just hold off our fight. While they're making that treaty, Cassander had his own ambition. So Cassander sent an assassinator to kill Alexander IV, Roxanne, and Olympias all together. Well, this is how the history goes, right? So Cassander assassin Alexander IV, Roxanne, Olympias, all assassin. What happened was, Cassander was married to Alexander's daughter. Alexander had a daughter. Cassander was married to Alexander, the daughter. Now you understand why he wanted to kill the Alexander IV and Roxanne and the Olympias, because now he wanted to show, I am the only one who's left with the Alexander's siblings, and I am the king, right? He wanted to proclaim that. So therefore, now all the peace treaty that they had was all destroyed. So that's how the third war of Daidachi ended. So now all the kings are dead, right? Alexander IV is dead. Philip III is dead. Roxanne is dead. Olympia is dead. So all the kings are dead. So is there any king? No more king. So what happened? They themselves called, I am the king. So the first one who claimed as a king is Antigonus. Antigonus says, I am the king now, because there's no king left. I'm the king. Antigonus says, I'm the king, and said, Seleucus says, you're not the king. I'm the king. And then Seleucus, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, they all claimed themselves, I am the king. So, after the death of Alexander IV, everyone called himself, I am the king. So now, there are 4 kings. Antigonus, Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. They all claimed themselves as the king. So, obviously, because all the kings are dead and they call themselves as the king, so Antigonus wanted to just take the Babylon back from Seleucus, because the Antigonus almost won the battle for everything, but because of Seleucus, he lost all his land. So he wanted to just kill the Seleucus. So he, in a BC 310, he sent all his infantry over to Babylon to take the control back. And Antigonus was literally winning against the Seleucus. But Antigonus was fighting with his son Demetrius, and at the beginning, Antigonus was winning, and Demetrius was leading all the horses and with the soldiers, and then Seleucus was very, very smart. And Seleucus was actually working with the other generals, the strongest the horsemans that Demetrius had. He just let destroy one group of his the horsemen to Demetrius, and then he drove them away from the battlefield, and it literally blocked Demetrius with the elephant group, block him off while he was attacking Antigonus on the one side. Antigonus was literally losing the battlefield, and Antigonus was waiting for his son Demetrius to come back to the battlefield, but Demetrius never came back. It's not like he never came back. He wanted to come back, but he couldn't come back because Seleucus literally blocked Demetrius off with the elephant. And then at the battlefield, Antigonus died at the battlefield. Now, what happened now? Antigonus is removed. Now what happened? Who's literally just taking control now? Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus. So therefore, now they literally divided the land. So that's how the third Daidachi War ended. And while there Antigonus and Seleucus and the alliance was fighting against the Antigonus in the Babylon area, Ptolemy was trying to just expand his territory as well, because everybody has their own idea of how they want to expand, right? At the same time, Ptolemy was not happy, because remember, Seleucus was under Ptolemy. Ptolemy was used by Seleucus, and Ptolemy sent to Seleucus to take over the land. But after Seleucus took over that Babylon, and he said goodbye to Ptolemy, this is my land, right? And Ptolemy was upset and said, what the hell? I sent you to take over the land and come back to me. You're my general. But now he claimed himself as a king. So Ptolemy was not, was very upset. So what happened was Antigonus, before he died, he sent his son Demetrius. Demetrius was as literally fighting against the Ptolemy and going back and forth, back and forth. And later on, the fighting against Demetrius, which is the son of Antigonus and Ptolemy was also trying to take over the control of the Babylon. Obviously, they were fighting against each other, right? Because they want to expand. But Demetrius and Ptolemy was having multiple war of each other, especially the war in the road. Let me see if there's the map that I can show you where the road is. Let me show you the map again. The same map. Okay. It is not shown here. You see this where Salem is, right? This particular land that you see. Do you know what this land is? This island? Does anyone know what this island is?
Is that the island that Paul was exiled to?
This is Cyprus. This is a Cyprus. Cyprus was a very, very important island at that time. And besides this, a Cyprus, there's a small land over here. You see this small land? Another island here. This is one of the key islands. It's called a Rhode. Rhode Island. You know the Rhode Island here in up in the Boston area, right?
R-H-O-D, Rhode.
Rhode, yep. That Rhode Island is the one of the key important island, because whoever takes control of the Rhode Island is the one who actually just governs this area. So everybody wanted to just take control of this Rhode Island. And Demetrius and the Ptolemy was the fighting at this battlefield. And Ptolemy was actually helping Rhodians, while Demetrius was the fighting against the Ptolemy and Rhodians. And later on, they protected this land. So when you actually go to Rhode, there is actually a statue that that shows they won the battle against the Demetrius and the fighting against the people of the Antigonus. So later on, eventually, Ptolemy was pushed down back to the Egypt. Now, Ptolemy claimed himself, I am the pharaoh. So he became a pharaoh of Egypt. So now you can see the pharaoh of the time of Genesis that we know, right, was the pure Egyptians, right? But ever since the Ptolemy took over that land and became a pharaoh, and they started to get mixed up with the true Egyptians as well as the Macedonians and Greeks. So now, what does Egyptians supposed to look like originally?
All gold.
Right? Think about it. Egyptians in the time of Moses, right? The pure Egyptians, original Egyptians, were like very much with the dark skin color,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now they mix with the Europeans, which is the Macedonians and Greeks, because Ptolemy became the pharaoh. Now you understand why Cleopatra, right, has the beauty, because they were mixed. Imagine, have you ever seen some of the kids were mixed with white and Asians? Right? It's just like they got the beauty of the Western world as well as the Eastern world, but like it's just like a little bit different, right? But it has a beauty in it, right? Similar to that. Because the Ptolemy claimed himself is the pharaoh, now everything got mixed up. So now today's Egypt, it is not a pure original Egyptians anymore. It's purely mixed up. And I can talk about that another day for that one. But anyway, come back to the story. Now, the big land that Alexander had left, literally, it now became the 4 different big P's. What is? Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. So now their 4 big land was divided. So now, go back to the verse, Daniel. Once again, verse 4 again. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. So 4 winds of heaven, who's he referring to? Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, Ptolemy. 4 generals we're talking here. That's what this is about. Just to explain this one verse, I had to go over this long story, what this is about. Now, so let me just go over so we have the Lysimachus and Cassander and Seleucus as well as Ptolemy. But now the story, literally, Lysimachus was very small portions, right? And he only took over the Trachea area. And what happened was Cassander, after the 4th war of the Daidachi, Cassander died. And after Cassander died and his sons of Cassander was fighting over each other to take control, and at that time, Antigonus' son Demetrius is invaded into Cassander's the area, and he killed all the Cassander's sons and took over that. And Lysimachus and Cassander's, Cassander was destroyed because of the Demetrius, which is the sons of Antigonus. So that was a small portions, but now literally between Ptolemy and Seleucus, they started to fight. It's called the Syrian War. Now after the war of Daidachi ended, now all this war between all these generals of Alexander. The later on, they all passed away. And then Ptolemy and Seleucus was the biggest fight. That ran for more than 150 years war. They're called the Syrian War. There are many wars. Right? Now, verse 5. Then the king of the south shall be strong. This is south. The king of the south is referring to Ptolemy. But one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. So, one of his princes shall be stronger. This is Seleucus. So, verse 5 is start to talk about the war between the Seleucus and Ptolemy. Now, I'm going to talk about the Syrian War now. Now, the war of Daidachi is ended. Now, between the Ptolemy and Seleucus is the now becoming a major portions of the story of this history. So, before I actually go over here, let me just go over a few important part of it. Remember, Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander as well. Seleucus also actually married at the Bactria when Alexander got married to Roxanne because Roxanne was the princess of Bactria. When they invaded into Bactria, Alexander showed the sort of whatchamacall the as a sort of the foreign policy, literally. He just wanted to get married to a princess of a Bactria to just to make a peace with the Bactrians. And at that time, Alexander had made many of his soldiers to marry to the Bactrian. And one of those men who married at the Bactria was Seleucus as well. And when Seleucus took control of the Babylon area, he wanted to just expand his territory as big as he could possibly, expand, just like the Antigonus did. He wanted to just took over as much the land he could possibly take over. So he took over the majority of the Assyrian, the cities, from the Syria all the way over to the India is how much he really just took over. And later on, he take over the land where the Antigonus literally just was ruling. What happened was there was a son of Ptolemy. While he was the Ptolemy's, the firstborn son was actually came to Seleucus because the first son was the fighting against the second son of Ptolemy, and he lost the battle. So the first son of Ptolemy came to Seleucus because remember, Seleucus was with the Ptolemy before, so they knew each other. And since the first son of Ptolemy came to Seleucus to really just, came as the to really protect himself. Later on, the first son of Ptolemy, assassinated Seleucus the first. I mean, when you look at the history, it's just either you get killed, you kill someone. Right? That's the story of the history, right? And the Seleucus was, he actually betrayed a Ptolemy to take over the land of Babylon, and then but he kept the first son of Ptolemy, and he was assassinated by the Ptolemy's son because he betrayed the Seleucus. So it's like history goes around, comes around, goes around. That's literally what happens. But after the Seleucus was assassinated by the Ptolemy's the firstborn son, he's a son, Antiochus the first. He became a king of Seleucus kingdom. So Seleucus had the biggest the land over all other, the folks, right? He's got the biggest the land of all. He was actually having a fight with the Celt in the Galatians area, the regions, and then he freed up the people of Galatia from the Celt, and people used to call him Soter. Soter means savior. So Antiochus the first, his nickname was a Soter. While he was fighting against the Celt, he died at the battlefield. So the Antiochus the first, the Soter, died at the battlefield. And then died at the battlefield. And then, while he was actually, Antiochus the first was just fighting with the Celt, Ptolemy was trying to just attack the Babylon. But they were having those fight. None of the winners. They just both lost. And then Antiochus the first the war between the Ptolemy was about 4 years between the BC 275 through BC 271. He wanted to make a treaty with the sons of the families of Antiochus, not Antiochus, Antigonus. So they were actually fighting, but the fight was not that really the big. But that was the very first war between Ptolemy and the Antiochus, which is the Seleucus Empire or dynasty. That's the very first Syrian War that they had during that fight during 4 years. And after Antiochus the first died in BC 261, Antiochus the second became the king, which is the sons of Antiochus the first. So when the Antiochus the second became the king, according to the history, he wasn't the best king. He was enjoying with the liquor a lot, and he married to his stepsister. Laodike. I don't know if you ever heard of the Laodike. Story of a Laodike is the very, very famous. But let me explain what that is. But anyway, Antiochus II married to his stepsister Laodike, and while they're still having the war between the Ptolemy II and the Antiochus II, Ptolemy II was just really just made Antiochus II very painful. And Antiochus II had a war with Ptolemy, and he started the Second Syrian War between BC 259 through 255, which is about another 4 years. Antigonus II was actually fighting against the Ptolemy. He took some of the land back from Ptolemy. And while he was taking over the Miletus area and then pushed the Ptolemy's soldiers out of that area, Miletus, the people of Miletus told Antiochus, said, you are like God to us. So they started to call Antiochus II as Theos. Theos means God. So Antiochus II's nickname became Theos. And because the people of the Miletus that called him Theos, he forced other people to call himself Theos. So at that point, now he became like a god. He's no longer king anymore. He become like God. And because of the Syrian War, for almost the last for like 9 years between until the BC 250. Between the Seleucus, Antiochus II, and the Ptolemy II, they're fighting for a long time, and they settled in and said, you know what, let's just stop here. It's just we're losing so much here, and let's just make a peace treaty here. So Ptolemy said, let's have a peace. But as the peace treaty, what I'm going to do is I am going to give you my daughter. My daughter, Bernike, it was the daughters of the Ptolemies II. I'm going to give my daughter to you as the peace treaty. So what you need to do is I want you to just throw your wife, Laodike, and marry to my daughter. So Ptolemy II gave his daughters to Antiochus II. So now what happened? Antiochus II already married to his stepsister Laodike, and he had sons already. But because the Antiochus had to make a peace treaty with the Ptolemy II, he literally just to throw Laodike out. Well, what happens when Laodike was pushed out? This is why you don't mess around with the woman. When you mess around with women, that gets really, dangerous. I warned you. Don't mess around with a woman. So Laodike was literally just so mad. So what happened? Later on, Laodike literally poisoned her husband, Antiochus II. And Laodicea killed Berenike and his sons. He poisoned them all. So you have to be very careful and watch out and check your kitchens, when you get, your wife, mad, you just have to just watch out what they're putting in their, the food that you're eating. So literally, they killed Antiochus II, Berenike, sons, coming back. Now, take a look at verse 6. Daniel. After some years, they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. This is the story of Ptolemy II and Antiochus II, and how Ptolemy II gave his daughter Berenike over to Antiochus II. This is the story of that story that I just mentioned to you. Now, you get the idea? Well, I need to go over more, but unfortunately, I guess the time is up here already. So I'm just going to end it here. But at least you get the story of the old story of Daidachi. And now we're going into the war between Seleucus and the Ptolemy, which is the war we call the Syrian War. And this story will last for the rest of the chapter 11. So hopefully we'll just get through this story of Seleucus as well as the Ptolemy story in the next week.